Kerry Flynn, media reporter at Axios. I also co-run Media Trends Executive and contribute to the weekly Media Trends newsletter. If you don't subscribe, please do. Go to Axios.com or find me after. Again, I'm so happy to be here, and I am thrilled to be having a conversation with two people who are transforming what it means to build a modern media brand. We have Michael Bosstick and Lauryn Bosstick with us today, the co-founders and CEOs of Dear Media.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. How are you?
Oh. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
For those who don't know, we were just talking about behind stage, you guys run this massive media network, including your podcast stats are pretty unreal. And when I think about podcasting today, it's perhaps one of the most important mediums in media. It feels that it's not just entertainment, but it's really redefining and dominating conversation and commerce. I'm wondering if you could speak to why do you think we're having and have reached this era in podcasting?
Well, I'm just happy because normally I would start these things off and explain for 10 minutes what a podcast was. So luckily I don't have to do that anymore. I really think that Lauryn and I have been doing this now for close to a decade. And for us personally, it was a medium that had very little barrier to entry, still does. We had no guardrails around, the things we were excited about talking about. We had no process of having to get approval to talk about things we were excited about. And I think it's really risen because any creator, any voice can really get on and start talking about things they're passionate about in a very authentic and one-to-one way. And so I think, consumers and audiences are looking for more and more of that. And because of that, I think you've seen a great rise in the platform.
So one thing I appreciate about your podcast is it's a lot of really authentic, to use a buzzword, but I would say unfiltered conversation. It's very open, though you obviously work with advertisers as a media company. So I'm curious how you balance that. Letting your hosts be open and unfiltered, yet maintaining your relationships with advertisers?
Well, I think going back to the rise of podcasts, I think audiences and hosts were craving the ability to talk about things in an honest, open, and authentic way. I personally don't censor anyone on our platform. I'm, pretty much a free speech absolutionist. I've gotten some flack for that, but I've always thought who am I to decide what people can say and not say on a platform? From a straight advertising perspective, the platforms and the audience growth speaks kind of for themselves. You've seen a decline in traditional media and people moving over to trusted voices on these kinds of platforms. And so from a business perspective, to me, it also makes sense to let people share what they want to share in an authentic way because it's what audiences are craving and looking for. And for me, I've always focused on the audience and less on the advertisers. Advertisers. I obviously love working with our partners. But for me, if you build great content that people actually care about and trust, the other stuff kind of takes care of itself. And I think it's what the advertisers are looking for in the long run.
I also think as a brand, because I work on the brand side with the Skinny Confidential product line, and we have a lot of people that we advertise with, a lot of influencers. I don't think that the brand has to necessarily sign off and agree with every single thing the host says. I always say when I go to dinner with someone, I hope there's 15 people at the table that have different opinions. I want it to be as colorful as possible. And I think the same goes with an advertiser and an influencer or a podcaster. You don't have to agree with every single thing they say. I think you just have to sort of have the same essence and the same sort of vibe. It doesn't have to be oh my God, I'm signing off on every single thing this podcaster says.
I mean, it comes down to trust. You may not agree with what someone's saying on the other end of a mic or a camera, but do you trust them? And if you trust that they believe in the conviction around their speech, then I think it creates deeper engagement for the things that they're talking about.
How important is personal brand building to your shows and your hosts? What I find fascinating is you've signed Jordan Sparks, for example. I think, she's a pretty good household name. People know her. But how do you help perhaps some of your other hosts with their own personal brand building to make sure that they're growing as part of your network?
I mean, when we started Dear Media, we never thought about building a podcast business or even a media company. We just looked at it as, the media channels were a cornerstone for people to establish a direct connection with the people they were speaking to, but it was also the springboard to go and to launch other areas of their business. So in Lauryn's case, she's got her product line. We've done that with some other hosts. In Jordan's case, I think it was to develop a voice beyond what she does as an entertainer and singer. And so, we work with people for that to help them come up with content and ideas that take them maybe beyond what they're known for and help them really develop a unique voice that they can, carry into all sorts of different directions.
I also think if you're on the advertising side, it's really important to look at each of these podcasters, like you guys said, as a personal brand. There's a 360 approach that's really unique and interesting that you can do. So instead of just getting a podcast ad, you could also get a set of stories and a reel and a TikTok and maybe a blog mention and a newsletter inclusion. Like, I just think that instead of just looking at it as like, oh, I want to do a podcast ad and where's the ROI, I think you look at it from a 360 approach about how you can use each of the personal brands to tell a story through each medium. Now, Substack, there's so many creative ways to use a lot of these personal brands, so it makes sense for both of them and feels like a marriage as opposed to a one-night stand.
I mean, to age ourselves a bit, when Lauryn and I started our podcast, we thought that the podcast would lead to more blog traffic. That's why we did it. We didn't even think about advertisers. It was, again, 10 years ago. But what we also found, we started the show, we joined a prominent podcast network, and we quickly realized that it was a lot of legacy radio tactics that were being deployed to monetize those platforms. And I was a former advertiser, had an agency at one point, and what I realized, my clients were looking for more of this approach where it's like, if someone like Lauryn is going to talk about it on the show, they also want it to show up in her social channels. What does it look like in newsletter? What does it look like to show up in an event? And I got a ton of pushback in the beginning saying like, hey, no podcast advertiser wants that. And I said, well, we're not reaching podcast advertisers, we're reaching advertisers, people that are interested in having true partnerships. And so Dear Media was never set up to deploy podcast tactics. We've done no dynamic insertion, we still don't. I think it's going backwards. I think that's what the reason we've all moved away from radio and, cable television is because the consumer wants to understand why that host chose that product. They don't want a voice that they've never heard of coming in and disrupting their show, which is why we all fast forward and move on. And so what we did was we set up like true partnerships for the talent across all of their relevant channels. And I think it gives the advertisers and the audience a better result.
And I also think like everyone in this audience would know this, what you really want to buy and sell is attention. And however that attention comes through, whether it's, it's like an octopus, there's all these different arms that you can go through. It doesn't need to just be one channel. That 360 approach, you can get attention in a lot of different ways. And however you can get it and tell a story, that's always a win. It's a win for you. It's a win for the consumer. It's a win for the person who's doing the ad. It's like a win-win-win, and that's what you really, really want.
I'd love to hear more about the business of Dear Media. So as we're talking about, there's a ton of advertising revenue, right, and partnerships, but you also do a lot of commerce. Can you walk us through, like, what does the revenue pie look like? What are you seeing really, what's driving your growth right now?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Dear Media, the media platform is an ads-based business, as most media companies are, but what we also realize is that we have this direct relationship with the audience at scale across all of these different properties. And when we started to looking around the market, it's like, well, we're promoting everybody else's products. Why would we not be on those cap tables? Why would we not start our own businesses? Give you like an example. If we want to launch one of the next great parenting brands, we have a lot of new moms on these platforms that are talking about parenting, speaking to new parents about parenting. Dear Media would be interested in looking at a brand that we would help incubate and own and essentially advertise with ourselves. And so, with Lauryn's business, it's a perfect example. She's obviously primarily in the beauty space. We work with a lot of beauty brands, but we also said, hey, if we're speaking to this audience directly, why would we not also own our own brands? And so all of the hosts that come through Dear Media have the opportunity to have that conversation with us. Sometimes it's not the right fit. Sometimes it is. Sometimes we invest. Sometimes we incubate. But we never want to limit ourselves from not being able to look at those opportunities.
And to me, the most successful people in this space that have launched brands as podcasters are the ones that sort of content market what they're going to launch before they launch it. So a really good example of this, like high level, is like Bethany Frankel. She went on, Real Housewives of New York, and she talked about the skinny girl margarita, and like she was tasting, and all of a sudden then comes a product. I think it's really important before you launch something to have a strategy around content marketing and make sure you're talking about it, and it's actually something that's in your world before you put a product out. So the influencers, I feel like, that just slap a white label on something and like it doesn't really make sense to their story. There's not a lot of longevity in that. I think it's really important to make sure that you're telling the story before you launch a product.
Yeah, I think we've just always approached it from a common sense perspective. right? Like if it's the right advertiser and it makes sense with these audiences, it's also likely something that Dear Media wants to look at to either invest in or start ourselves, right? And we've never wanted to say, hey, we're only a media company that only does advertising. Because again, like I think the hardest thing these days is not to stand up a media property or not to create content. It is to aggregate the flywheel of this kind of attention and keep it focused in a way that you can deploy it at scale.
Clearly, you guys have had great commerce success. I think, Lauryn, you just posted that you sold out of one of your products. So in terms of then, like, how do you recommend your other, like, people in your portfolio, what products that they should be doing, right? Because I wonder as well, like, you don't want to compete with your advertisers, right? Which spaces, can you elaborate a little bit more that it makes sense to go deep on and to make that bet on and have that sell out?
I think that the competing thing is interesting. For me as a brand, as a Skinny Confidential, I encourage my social media girls to take pictures next to other brands. So I'll give you an example. The ice roller, the Skinny Confidential ice roller, I want it next to Dr. Dennis Gross. I want it next to Glossier. I want it next to the Rhode. And I think that we've reached that where it's actually like, if I launched a supplement, which I've launched electrolytes, I still talk about Symbiotica's elderberry and their chlorophyll. Like, I think there's a way for it to be integrated throughout your daily routine that makes sense. I don't really look at it like a competition. I think that it almost gives you more credibility and authority in a space to then be talking about a supplement when you have your own. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
Well, again, like as a former advertiser, I think many times we as advertisers limit ourselves from opportunities because we get caught up on that kind of thing. And if I promise if I went into anyone's pantries or medicine cabinets, you're going to see an assortment of all sorts of different brands, right? You're not going to buy one and then not buy another. You're going to buy great products from great brands. And so for us, we focus more on having harmony with the people that are advertising with us and having synergistic relationships. So if you're using an ice roller from Lauryn, you can also then use a skincare product from Glossier or Dr. Dennis or whatever. If you drink one beverage, you're also going to drink another, right? If you use one fashion brand, you're also going to wear other things. So we try not to get so focused on like, oh my God, that's competition, and focus more on like what the consumer is actually doing.
And I think that the network is exactly what he just said. It's like bringing other people up and supporting other shows. Just because someone listens to our show doesn't mean they can't listen to The Toast. I think people want variety in whatever category that they're in. So the more we can give them, the better.
One thing I'd be curious your perspective on in terms of, as you said, podcasting is not radio, right? But the business of podcasting very much is changing. We just saw Netflix and Spotify sign a deal to put some of Spotify's video podcasts on Netflix. Are your eyes very open to that? I know that you guys do a lot with video podcasting. So what was your reaction to that deal?
Well, again, like going back to the early days, now it's a headline, but I really just think that podcasts are the new talk shows. It's just in a different delivery form, right? For the longest time, they were the weird stepchild of media. It was like you would have all these great things and a podcast. My dad still thinks I'm on the radio. And so, I think like there's some serious attention being, paid now, and there's a lot of serious creators and celebrities and guests and executives that are utilizing this medium, but I don't even really talk about them as podcasts anymore. If you see me in media, I've done very little with podcast publications because I've always felt that the podcast industry specifically, and many of the executives have done a good job of keeping it small and almost looked at as like a side channel. Really, to me, like they're just the new shows. They live audio, video on every relevant platform. They're in newsletters. They're short form, they're long form, they're on social platforms, they're live events, and they're launch pads to go into any kind of, they're just new media. And so I talk about them in that way, and I just think they're talk shows with better unit economics on maybe more relevant and widely reachable audiences.
I also think as an advertiser, something that really works well is when there's a founder that is very articulate, that knows how to speak on a mic, that can come on without selling their product. No one wants to be Vanna White sold to. Just a seamless conversation. So say like you get Andrew Huberman on and he owns a product. The conversation could be all about sleep. And then at the end, it's naturally integrated at the end that he has a sleep product and you can use code SKINNY to use it. The conversation cannot be selly. We never try to push or sell to the audience. At the end of the day, when they're checking out, they need to feel like it's their decision and it's something that'll add value to their life. So I think having founder interviews too is a really good way that you can use video or Netflix. I'm really into the founder interviews if the founder is trained on a mic and ready to go.
Yeah, that's the other thing I would say for the advertisers in the room. For the longest time, and this is how I used to buy ads on Facebook and Google, people would be so focused on that coupon code or that landing page or that direct checkout link. And really, you get some of that in podcasts, but you also have PR and you also have a brand voice behind it, and you have a spokesperson, and you get a celebrity endorsement, and you can, more importantly, you can start a conversation, because consumers now don't just care if the product's good. They want to know the why behind that product. They want to know why that founder chose that mission, and they want to connect with it. And what we always say is the audience is then smart enough to go and find all of the links or where to buy and all that. But really what they're looking for is the story and the mission.
A good example, by the way, the best interview that I've ever had with a founder is the Branch Basics episode with the owner, Allison. She told her story in such an organic, authentic way that there was not one person that was not buying her product at the end. That made a really, really great interview, and it was really fun to promote. It's like, I'm the practitioner, I'm the one who's using it, and she's the expert, and she's the storyteller, and we put her on a pedestal to tell her story, and the audience just loves it.
2 more quick questions before we get the hook here. I obviously wanted to ask you about AI. We talked a lot about what's next for podcasting. Where do you see AI fitting in? I know you guys are signing a lot of talent. Do you see an AI host in the future? My second question would be, what else is next for Dear Media? I know you made a great acquisition of Obey Fitness. Do you see more acquisitions in M&A in the future?
So for AI, I look at it just as any other technology. I think it's going to streamline processes. I think it's going to make companies operate in a more efficient way. I don't think in podcasting in general that you're going to displace the host. I think one thing that you'll see with AI is that we will still, as humans, crave that human connection, but we will recognize AI's place in maybe making the product better or the information greater. Or in Lauryn and I's case, it's been really helpful for research and understanding, what other kinds of questions or directions. So I think you'll see that, and then obviously all the editing tools that are coming out. And yeah, for Dear Media, we're always looking for interesting things from an M&A perspective. Again, through the lens of, do we provide that product or service greater efficiencies, and will our audience really dive into whatever that opportunity may be? So yes.
I use AI to fine-tune everything. So I'll take a question and I'll say, this is the question that I really want to know. Have they been asked this a lot? If they've been asked it a lot, I'll pivot to a different question. I'll say, how can I make this question more impactful? How can I pack a punch? But I do always take it and add my own spin. So I think, to me, it's sort of like a research partner, and it's collaborative. I think it's great.
We also use it to try to win arguments in our marriage with each other. We will.
I have used it to edit a text message to my husband to prove a point.
Well, we got to clearly talk more about that backstage. Well, thank you, Lauryn and Michael, for your time today and joining us in Austin.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you guys.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much.